Anyway, there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, National Post is reporting the carbon tax is collapsing and could take Justin Trudeau down with it. Hopefully, it's not a guarantee, but I hope that happens. Here is National Post, and it says, it must have seemed like a good idea at the time. This is talking about jumping the shark in Happy Days. In the 5th season of Happy Days, the lead character, Fonzie, answers a challenge to his bravery by donning water skis and swim trunks, as well as his trademark leather jacket, to jump over a live shark. Ron Howard, the star of the show, who would go on to be one of Hollywood's top directors, remembers thinking creatively, this is not one of our greatest episodes. And the phrase to jump the shark is now wheeled out whenever someone or something is deemed to have introduced an idea completely contrary to the original mission. Well, yes and no. I've heard it applied to television shows, but I've also heard it applied to administrations, presidential administrations, so on and so forth. Anyway, regardless of all that, Justin Trudeau has decided to exempt home heating oil from the carbon tax for the next 3 years, was his jump the shark moment, one from which he may never recover. A month before the Liberal government made the announcement on Thursday, Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault rejected the idea, saying it would be unfair for the rest of the Federation if Ottawa carved out exceptions that would benefit the Atlantic provinces, where around 40% of homes are heated with oil. 3 days before the announcement was made, Sean Fraser, the housing minister, stood in the House of Commons and said such a move would, quote, make pollution free again. That's not true. It's not true. It's a catchphrase and it's rhetoric, but it's not true. Back to this. One wonders how those men are feeling now. Probably the same as former Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, who tweeted on Thursday, politics will break your heart. This is not just any shabby political side deal. It's core to the entire Trudeau project and could well see the entire carbon pricing edifice collapse. Yeah, hopefully it does. Hopefully it absolutely does, because it is antithetical to Canada and Canadians to tax some of us in some way and others in a different way, to punish them for not, to punish those ones that you're taxing more for not voting enough Liberal members of Parliament in their region, right? That's not how Canada works. We're supposed to be a democracy of free-thinking people sharing ideas about how to manage our resources effectively to benefit the citizens here. And it's very interesting that we can't get there, right? It's a power game. It has nothing to do with actually governing the country well. It has more to do with my group's more powerful and better than your group. It's very interesting. Philip Lawrence, who's an MP, says, breaking, the governor of the Bank of Canada, reveals that if the carbon tax was scrapped, the inflation rate would drop 16% overnight. I thought inflation was at 8%. Or 3%? What are the numbers right now? Different depending on the housing inflation is, 9% or something like that, depending on where it's measured from. And food inflation is 3%, depending on where it's measured from. But there are whole baskets of products that a lot of people use, like gasoline and milk and all sorts of other stuff, that are up way more than 3%. But those aren't included in the basket of goods that are calculated to find our inflationary rate. Figure that one out, right? It's very, very strange. But all of this goes to the idea that it is very expensive to live in Canada. It didn't used to be, and it's a policy-driven situation where the government of Canada is engaging in bad policy that's resulting in inflation, meaning things cost more, and that's bad. And people keep telling them that they do this, and they keep ignoring them, saying, that's racist, or no, it doesn't, or don't make pollution free, or whatever nonsense rhetoric they come up with to excuse their bad policy and continued bad behavior. Here's Diana Murphy. She says, shocking statement by Tiff Macklem. Basically, if Trudeau stopped overspending, interest rates would go down. Yeah. Thank a Liberal when you renew your mortgages. Ouch. So here's the CTV report on this. Fiscal and monetary policy rowing in opposite directions, Tiff Macklem says. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says fiscal and monetary policy are rowing in opposite directions, making it harder to bring inflation down. Macklem is appearing before the MPs on the House of Commons Finance Committee after the Bank of Canada's recent rate decision and quarterly economic projections. In response to questions from the Conservative MP Jarjir Singh Hallan, the governor says the government spending is working at cross purposes with the central bank's efforts to bring inflation down. That's a kind of plain way to say it, but it's still hiding things. Saying something is working at cross efforts. I don't think one of the tenets of a newspaper is you write to a grade 5 comprehension level. You don't want to be too complicated, flowery with your words, right? Because not everybody has the ability to read complex ideas and understand them well. So you keep your language fairly low, right? Grade 5 to 7 is where the newspaper generally is, sometimes even grade 3, depending on the target audience. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's interesting to note when the governor of the Bank of Canada comes in, he's using words that are a little bit above that. That's, I mean, even the idea of that working cross, what does he say? Cross purposes. Using that word, you have to understand what one purpose is and then the other, right? So he's not explaining it very plainly. You have to work to understand what he's talking about a little bit. So I not necessarily that I think that's bad or good. I think everybody should have as good comprehension as they can, but it's not playing to a wide audience. The governor says that according to the federal and provincial budgets, the government's spending aggregate will grow faster than the supply in the economy over the next year, adding upward pressure to inflation. That's easy to understand, right? Here's what's happening. Here's why it matters to you. That's easy to understand. It would be helpful if monetary and fiscal policy was rowing in the same direction, Macklem said. At the same time, now here's the other part, right? So at the beginning of that, it says bad government policy is working against the government of Canada or the Bank of Canada reducing inflation. And that's bad, right? But they say, hold on. The governor said it's important to compare Canada's fiscal stance to other countries. Why is that? You quote, you have to compare Canada to other countries. Canada's deficit to GDP ratio is the lowest in the G7, Macklem said. It seems to me like on one side of things, you should get really angry. And I'm not trying to tell you how to feel. I'm just trying to say on one side of things, there's a response to this. Bad policies leading to everything costing more. The government knows they're doing this. They're working cross purposes. The governor of the Bank of Canada knows this. We should get mad at these bad policies that have taken us out of sensible governance and affordability, right? We should get angry with that. People would be upset if that was the situation. People would get angry, right? That's reasonable. But the news tries to manage it by saying, hold on a second though. Look at this. We're the leader of the G7, or we're the lowest in the G7. So don't worry, right? Go back to sleep, man. It's cool. The bad policies aren't that bad because we're the lowest in something in the G7. And I mean, what does it matter? It says you have to compare Canada to other countries, and our deficit to GDP ratio. Our deficit to GDP ratio is fine. So don't worry about rent being completely unaffordable. How does that make sense? It doesn't. It doesn't. And so I think it's ridiculous that they're trying to, well, not they're trying to. The news media's job is to inform the public, but they're informing the public in such a way to tell you, yes, but also to give you a reason to not care about it all that much and go right back to sleep. So it's a very insidious little suggestion. Don't worry, we're the lowest in the G7, so everything's fine. Everything will work out. Maybe, but it seems like we're going to have to actually do work for this to actually work out for us, because the people who are in charge of things are in charge of the courts, and they're in charge of creating the laws. And, well, I mean, they're trying to stay in power, and they're trying to hit this balance of being able to bankrupt us to the point of we won't be able to undo it when it's done, right? Here's Scott Moe, and he says, I'm going to break the law if you don't repeal this unfair tax break for Atlantic Canadians. I'm going to make that tax break here. Come get your tax dollars, right? Come get your pound of flesh, says Scott Moe. And so that's interesting. That's strong. This is probably the strongest position of any premier I've ever seen in my entire life, standing up to the Canadian government like this. Honestly, truthfully, never seen anything like it. Good job, Scott Moe. I think it deserves. I think that the government's bad policies and overreach deserve a response like this. I don't think Scott Moe is wrong. I think he's right. I've just never seen anything like this, and I think it's a strong position. Well done, Scott Moe. Here we go.
Last week, Prime Minister Trudeau announced a 3-year exemption on the carbon tax for home heating oil. This exemption is primarily for families in Atlantic Canada where heating oil is used in 40% of their homes. In making this announcement, the Prime Minister has effectively destroyed 2 of the myths that he has created about the carbon tax. First is that the carbon tax is affordable, because most Canadians receive more back in rebates than they pay in carbon tax. If that were true, why would he need to remove it as an affordability measure on home heating oil for families in Atlantic Canada? And the second myth is this, that it's a tax that's being applied fairly in all parts of the country based on a set rate per ton of greenhouse gas emissions. Home heating oil is used primarily in one part of the country, and it has higher greenhouse gas emissions than other heat sources, like natural gas, that is used in most Saskatchewan homes. So the Prime Minister chose to make life more affordable for families in one part of the country while leaving Saskatchewan families out in the cold. How is that fair to families here in our province, where affordability is also an issue, where winters are cold, and where most of us use natural gas to stay warm? And now, a federal minister has said if people out west want a carbon tax exemption, we should elect more Liberals. This is no way to run a country. As Premier, I cannot accept the federal government giving an affordability break to people in one part of Canada, but not here. So today, I am calling on the federal government to offer the same carbon tax exemption to Saskatchewan families by extending it to all forms of home heating, not just heating oil. It's only fair to other Saskatchewan and Canadian families. Hopefully that exemption will be provided soon. But if not, effective January the 1st, Sask Energy will stop collecting and submitting the carbon tax on natural gas, effectively providing Saskatchewan residents with the very same exemption that the federal government is giving heating oil in Atlantic Canada. The federal government may say that's illegal and that you simply cannot choose to collect and pay your taxes. In most cases, I would agree with that. But it's the federal government that has created two classes of taxpayer by providing an exemption for heating oil. An exemption that really only applies in one part of the country and effectively excludes Saskatchewan. As Premier, it's my job to ensure Saskatchewan residents are treated fairly and equally with our fellow Canadians in other parts of the country, and that's what I am doing today. Of course, the real solution would be for the federal government to scrap the entire carbon tax on everyone and everything. But until that happens, it needs to at least be applied fairly across Canada. And that should mean no carbon tax on using natural gas to heat your home this winter in Saskatchewan.
I think pretty well done, right? Robin Hood of the prairies, and robbing from evil Justin Trudeau, who's in this one the sheriff of Nottingham, to give to the poor people of Saskatchewan. The same thing that the evil sheriff of Nottingham gives to his preferential little Atlantic provinces, right? And it's such an interesting situation. Good for Scott Moe. It's difficult to do what he's doing. He's going to get absolutely torched in the media for it. Just wait. Like, I don't know how they're going to do it, but they're going to do it. They're going to start coming out. People are going to start talking about how terrible Saskatchewan is. 30% reduction in fertilizer. Talk about 50%. 30% is all you'll be allowed in fertilizer in Saskatchewan. They're going to respond to this. Make no mistake, because that's all they have. That's absolutely all they have. Dan McTeague, and it's collapsing. And the more people refuse to pay it, the more it will collapse. Their power will evaporate. We just have to keep this going. But it's difficult. It's difficult because there are zealots. Here's Dan McTeague, and he's responding to Caligula. And Caligula says, can anyone articulate the inflationary rate and CPI if the carbon tax increase was today? And 16 cents carbon tax on $1.40 for gas and 20 cents for $1.70 for diesel is 11 and 12% respectively. As that cascades through the economy, one thing emerges. It's at least 5 times higher than the Bank of Canada's 2% guidance. Odd that no economist is calling this out, not Bank of Canada itself. So these carbon taxes are impossible to handle through a Bank of Canada by themselves because of the inflationary push they send through the economy. The Bank of Canada, I don't think, can respond to them properly. So the government is creating a situation that the Bank of Canada will not be able to manage over a period of time. Danielle Smith is responding to Scott Moe's bravery. She's asked about it, and she says, well, we can't do that here. But here we go.
We're going to speak to Premier Moe later in the show, and I was going to ask you about that. He says come January 1, Sask Energy is just not going to collect the carbon tax when it comes to home heating with natural gas. Is that something Alberta would consider, or is Saskatchewan alone on this one?
Well, we don't have the ability to do that. Saskatchewan has, of course, a crown corporation.
Right.
So Sask Energy has the ability to do that. We have a private market, and so we have a number of different players in our private market. I can't ask them to break the law. But here we are in a situation where we're going to have different policy in every part of the province because the federal government is not enacting a policy fairly in each of the different regions. So they've made a mess of it, and I think that they should acknowledge that rather than trying to deflect, and then do what is right, do what is fair, and take the fuel tax off all home heating fuel. Why should we have this level of unfairness where our neighbor in Saskatchewan isn't going to have the tax, our neighbors in Atlantic Canada won't, and we do? That doesn't seem to be a very constructive way of proceeding on this policy. It's way too divisive. So I have to say that I think it expressed what we have often felt in Western Canada, that they have no interest in coming to the table in a spirit of true cooperative federalism, and that's got to end. We all share the same objectives. We all want to make sure that we're reducing emissions, but we have to make sure we take care of our people first. And our people are suffering an affordability crisis, a lot of it being caused by the punitive carbon taxes levied by the federal government, and now they can't even enact them fairly. Even our own NDP opposition in Alberta has said that has taken the same position as we have, which is that we need to have fairness across the country. And so this is no longer a partisan issue in our province. We think it's outrageous that the federal government would disadvantage our region compared to another region in the country.
Welcome to Alberta, Danielle Smith. Have you not been paying attention? Justin Trudeau just plumb didn't mention you at all in his original acceptance speech. He just didn't mention Alberta. Leave that one out. Al who? BC? Yeah. CTV Montreal is reporting the NDP. Danielle Smith was just saying that the NDP even agree with her, and she was kind of laughing, like incredulous about it. I can't believe the NDP agree with us. But the NDP are going even further. I could get behind this. 100%. The NDP. This is the first time I've ever thought to myself, I agree with this, and it has something to do with the NDP. The NDP call for the GST to be removed from home heating. Click on the image below to watch. Yeah, why are we paying taxes if I don't pay GST? If I go to the grocery store and buy a chicken or something like that, like a chicken for eating tonight, or I don't know if the hot and ready ones are exempt from GST, but if you buy chicken that you cook yourself, you don't pay taxes on that. You don't pay taxes on peanut butter. There's a bunch of other ones that you don't pay taxes on because they're staple foods. Is being warm enough not staple enough to not tax people generally on these items that are necessary for them to live? Like that oil and gas is wonderful. I noticed that you buy a lot of it. I would love to, get in on that market. And so I'm just going to tax you. It's incredible, right? So I feel like we are being taken for a ride, but I've long felt like we're being taken for a ride. The GST, the carbon tax being paid on the GST, all of that, because the price of the carbon tax is on the total price of the bill, including the GST, which is just bad policy, and punitive, and it doesn't actually help anybody. So yeah, we should abolish the GST. We should abolish the carbon tax. We should abolish terrible governments that have globalist agendas. We should definitely do that. Moving on, let's talk about inflation. Here is D.D. Denslow, and I like this meme. I like memes generally. I think they're funny. And here's a construction worker. He's very happy. He's on a construction site. He looks very clean for a construction worker, but we'll look past that for the minute. He's got a white hard hat on, and it says, "Man struggling to feed his family, just happy he can fund 2 wars with his taxes." Yep, absolutely indeed. Here. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to canadapoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.